Well, hello there, folks. My name is Mark Miles, and I love helping trainers, presenters, workshop facilitators, you know the rest. Anyway, let's get into it. So, in today's video, I'm actually going to get a little geeky on you, and I'm going to admit something. Yes, in Australia, I work in the vocational education and training sector. Now, some of you may be familiar with what that is. Other people watching this from a global perspective may be going, what the hell is that? Never heard of it, right? But here in Australia, we've got something called the vocational education training field, so to speak, where basically we have just training organizations that people can come along to and study things like certificate 1, 2, 3, 4, diploma of whatever it may be. Now, as part of that, what we do is we actually have assessments that we run. And as part of the assessing process, there is something called validation that we do. Validation, big fancy word there, folks. But basically, validation is doing a quality review check of assessments, a quality review check of assessments. Now, that's all good and well, but what we find is people often go to a validation session and they're like, oh, technical terminology, freak out moment, overwhelm. I can't do it. And people sort of go into kind of like, oh, this is all too hard, right? And one of the reasons for that is a validation checklist or a validation even event basically uses a lot of terminology that means nothing to people, right? And what we need to realize is that, things like principles of assessment, rules of evidence, and all these fancy words are great. But at the end of the day, if you can't actually implement these concepts, talk about these concepts, and have a working, I guess, knowledge and capability to use these words, then you're kind of going to feel lost, right? So what I've done, yes, I'm about to give away some massive IP here, folks. And if you want it, and if you want the actual copy of the document, shoot me an email or shoot me a comment below and I'll send it out to you. But I'm about to release some massive IP, and I probably shouldn't, but I thought, why not? Because I am really tired, sick and tired of people going to validation sessions and not really understanding what they're actually doing and what's actually required by them as a trainer or assessor when they attend a validation, right? So what I'm going to show you right now is a checklist. Now, this checklist is a streetwise checklist that you can actually take along to a validation or even before you go to a validation and be able to tick yes or no and be able to go very clearly, yep, I can review this document, it makes sense, and we can see exactly what we need to fix up or what could be working well, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring up the checklist and you guys will be able to get first look at this checklist, which is super exciting as I release it to the marketplace or your eyes, right? So it's kind of like for your eyes only, but whoever sees the video, right? Now I've called it Mark's Master Assessment Review Checklist, right? So if you're in the vet sector, hopefully this will make sense for you and this video will give you some massive value. If you're not, you've probably already turned off the video, right? But what I've done is I've created a checklist that you can use in order to review every one of your assessments, whether it's a written test, or whether it's a workplace portfolio, or whether it is a observation checklist, or whether it is marking by another assessor, right? So if you know what I'm talking about, you're probably still watching and you're probably going, wow, this is a pretty cool tool. So let's get into it. All right, so the first one there is the mapping complete or are there gaps in the mapping, right? And if not completed, list the items that have gaps, right? Very cool. We got a yes, no, and then we got a place to list any gap items, right? So what you're going to do, you're going to look through the mapping and check and, remap it and then check if there's any gaps. Then if there are gaps, you list them, right? So you will list item 2.2 or whatever is missing. And then later, when you come to fill out your validation checklist, you've got it there ready to go, right? So number 2 is, does it mention or do the instructions mention reasonable adjustment in the instructions and the process for what reasonable adjustment will be? All right, if you know what that is, then that probably makes sense to you. If you don't, just ignore the comment there and you probably already switched off the video. Number 3, does it mention the availability of an RPL pathway? That relates to flexibility there, folks, right? Now, coming back, number 2, reasonable adjustment, that relates to fairness, right? Coming back, number 1 here is the mapping complete. Well, that relates to validity, but you probably already knew that, right? So let's come down. Number 4, does it mention WHS and safety requirements to be considered for the assessment? Probably a good thing to have covered in your overall wording there. Number 5, does it mention all the necessary resources required by the student and for the assessment to be undertaken? Drop a yes, drop a no. If no, what other resources could be mentioned? Pretty cool stuff, right? So we're going to come down. Is there a statement of original authorship that a student fills out or signs, right? If not, well, then we would say that authenticity is a bit of an issue there. Number 7, is there a comment regarding student appeals or complaints and how this is to take place? Yes or no, right? If it's a no, then probably one or information about that needs to be added in. Number 8, are there instructions on what happens if the case of reassessment if a student is deemed not yet competent, right? Then 2A, reviewing a written test. Do the instructions mention assessment conditions, where the assessment's to be done, supervised or unsupervised? Probably a good thing to know. Do the instructions mention if it's open book or closed book test? Probably a good thing to mention. Number 3, do the instructions mention the pass mark? It's always going to be 100%, but yeah, if it's not, well, there's something to be flagged there as well, right? So it always needs to be mentioned that it needs to be 100%, and all students need to get 100% to get satisfactory for the task. Do the instructions mention how the candidate is to submit their answers? Yes or no? If not, bit of an issue, right? Number 5, do the instructions mention a time limit for completing the assessment? 1 hour, 2 hours, 30 minutes, whatever it may be. Do the instructions mention expectations on answer length in the instructions? 1 sentence, 2 sentences, 1 word, all that kind of stuff. Is there a place for the assessor to put their name out when they mark it? Is there a place for the assessor to put the date when it is marked? Are there instructions for the assessor on how to mark it, e.g. referencing the marker's guide? Number 10, are there instructions for the assessor on what and where to sign and how to provide feedback at the end of the assessment? Is there a place for the candidate to put their name? All right, so on a written test, you probably want to have the candidate's name put there, right? Number 12, is there a place for the candidate to sign? Probably a good thing. Number 13, is there a place for the candidate to put the date of completion? Number 14, are the instructions in regards to what happens in the case of reassessment being required and how this will take place and, what's to be organized, right? Section 2B, let's continue with this checklist. Hope you're loving it. Number 15, is there a word count for every question or at least guidance on how long an answer should be, right? So what we're doing here in section 2B, we're actually going to review the questions themselves in the written test. Now, as you would probably know, the quality of the question will determine the quality of the answer. The quality of the question will determine the quality of the answer. And if we're not getting in written form what we want from the student, then probably need to change the instructions or we need to change the questions, right? So this section here reminds us to look at the quality of the questions and reminds us to look at, is there a word count there? If further guidance is required regarding word count, write the question number in the space below that would require a word count or further information around that. Number 16, are all questions worded appropriately for the AQF level and for general reliability sake, all right? Do the questions make sense? If no, which question would be worded better? Write the question number in the space below. Pretty exciting, pretty cool that you can just make a note there and you know exactly what needs to be fixed, all right? It's like maybe we make the question harder or easier, and maybe we reword it to make it simpler. Maybe we take out the fluff. I don't know. Whatever's going to be appropriate for the fault that you find there. All right, number 17, are all questions sufficiently contextualized? If no, which ones could be more contextualized to your workplace or the workplace you're writing the assessment for? Write the question number in the space below that could be more contextualized. Number 18, do all questions have benchmark answers or guidance on how to answer the questions for the assessor when marking the answers, and are all benchmarks good enough, right? So naturally, well, we hope there's going to be a marker's guide, right? But if you find issues with any of the benchmark answers in the marker's guide, number 18 is the place to note it. Right? Section 3, reviewing practical assessments here, folks. All right, so up till now, we're talking about the written assessments. Now let's jump to the practical, right? Now, off of the practical, you're going to come across an observation checklist or a list of tasks for the student to do. So this is where we take a look at those documents. So number one, in the assessment instructions for the practical assessment, does it clearly state what is to be observed? All right. Are you going to observe them, changing a tire? Are you going to observe them baking a cake, whatever it may be, taking an order at a coffee shop? All right. Number two, does it state where it is to be done by the candidate? Inside, outside, with customers, without, whatever it may be. Number three, does it state how many times it's to be done? 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 5 times. And you're probably going to grab that from the unit of competency, folks. Pretty obvious one on that one. Number four, does it state what equipment is to be used? Probably a good thing to add that in there because the student or the candidate's going to need to know what equipment to bring along or what equipment they need to access, right? Really important. Number five, does it state what is required for safety in WHS? Really important. What to do in the case of an emergency? All right, number six, are there enough observation checklists, right? So if you're going to observe them like 3 times, then ideally it's going to have 3 copies, 3 blank templates. Number seven, is there a place on the observation checklist for the candidate's name? Probably a good thing. Is there a place on the observation checklist for the candidate's signature? Good thing, right? Is there a place for the assessor's name? Yes, no. Is there a place for the assessor's signature? Yes, no. Is there a place for the date of each of the practical assessments? And number 12, is there enough space for the assessor to provide feedback overall and against each item that they actually observe the candidate do? Number 13, are there clear benchmarks for each observation criteria item, right? So it may be, all right, candidate makes the cafe latte. And then underneath it may say assessor must see the candidate use X amount of milk and X amount of beans. I don't know. So hopefully that's giving you some good prompters there for looking at the practical side of things. All right. Now let's look at reviewing instructions for a workplace project or portfolio. Hopefully you're loving this here, folks. This is pretty cool. Number one, does it clearly specify what evidence is required to be submitted by the candidate? Does it list it out clearly in it's impossible to misunderstand what's stated, right? No unspoken words, whatever the term there is. Number two, does it specify how the evidence is to be submitted and to who? All right. Number three, does it specify in what format is to be gathered and submitted? All right, electronic, hard copy, pencil, pen, all of that fun stuff. What software to be used, all that. Number four, does it specify how recent or up to date the evidence must be? All right, within the last 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it may be. Is there enough benchmark criteria for the assessor to use when marking supplied evidence by the candidate? Probably a good thing to think about. Now, let's look at section 5 of this magical checklist, which I'm sure that you'll love. Now, section 5 here is analyzing the marking by an assessor across the entire assessment, right? So this, as part of a validation, there's 2 aspects to validate. Well, there's many, but 2 aspects to a validation. Number one, we're going to review the assessment tools themselves. Another part of it is we're going to validate or check the marking by an assessor and to make sure that the assessor has marked the student's work on point and has marked it correctly, right? So let's check it out. So section 5 here, has the candidate signed all sections required? All right. Number 2 is, has the assessor signed all sections? Number 3, have they marked all questions? Is there a tick against each question? All right. Maybe that's something you care about. Maybe it isn't. I don't know. But there's a prompter in there for you. Number 4, do you agree with the marking for each question in the written text? And then number 5 is, do you agree with the marking on the observation checklist, right? And for both of them, we've got, if no, which ones do you disagree with or do you not agree with? If no, what is missing or could be changed here, right? So number 6, has the candidate been observed the required number of times, all right? Do they need to be observed 1 time, 2 times, 3 times? And has that been filled out there for you? Can you clearly see that being observed the required number of times? That comes back to sufficiency. We would know that, folks. Number 7, do you agree with the overall feedback provided to the candidate regarding their performance in the observation checklist, right? Do you agree with the comments or the feedback? All right. And number 8, has all the required evidence been gathered by the assessor and provided by the candidate for the workplace project? So maybe as part of the project, they're required to submit photos, reports, and all these different things. And is everything there? Yes, great. If not, well, what's missing? And here's the place where you actually can make a note of that, right? Number 9, do you agree with the overall result that's been provided to the candidate? Competent or not yet competent, or satisfactory or not yet satisfactory, right? So here is a great place to note that. All right. So coming down, we're at the end of the checklist. Yay, folks. All right. So that is a quick checklist that I want to share with you. I'm super excited about it. It's like one of the best things I've ever made in the vet sector, apart from all my delivery videos. I'm sure you're loving those. And my signature system for delivery and how I structure workshops and all that fun stuff. But today, I'm just stepping into the world of assessing, and I just really love breaking down technical concepts, putting them in practical sense and going, what does that actually freaking mean for the average person out there? That if I say principles of assessment, rules of evidence, you're like, what the hell? Give me something that actually makes sense and like actually make it make sense for me, and stop using all this technical terminology, right? Assessment tool or assessment instrument or principle, blah 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 blah. All right, let's get to the nitty gritty and let's have a clear, simple checklist that we can go through, and then we can relate that to the technical stuff. But stop going all technical and then trying to break it down into the simple. Let's just start from the simple and work up. And when we come to a validation, we're like, yeah, cool, this stuff kind of makes sense, right? And we kind of get a sense of how it all works and plays out. And we can actually speak the vernacular, not just get lost in it. Hopefully you got some value from the video, folks. I'm sure you did. And I'm sure that if you're someone that works in the vet sector, you just saw that checklist, you probably got as excited as I did, hopefully. And you probably want a copy of it. If you do, reach out. You know how to find me. And I've already started to share it with some people. And I've got great feedback already, which is super cool. But on that note, folks, if you got some value from the video, like, comment, share. Let's get this out there. And let's start to speak practical and not let's get lost in the vernacular. Thanks for watching, team.